Wel, croeso I fawr i'r Fringefest. Mae Trish wedi arwain wedi trefnu. When I was asked to give a talk here, I was thinking, what are we going to talk about? And I think that there's something that's been sort of going on for a while, and the headline on yesterday's Western Mail said about Welsh NHS Wales said, worst NHS performance, the new norm. And about a week or so ago, in Prime Minister's question time, the English Prime Minister was attacking the Welsh NHS. And the implication was that workers in NHS Wales were somehow inferior. You know, it wasn't exactly spelled out, but this was the feeling of that the workers in NHS in Wales were not doing the job properly or something. Well, my mother was, a district nurse, and my daughter-in-law is a nurse with a degree in nursing. So obviously, I'm quite interested in this. So I thought to myself, this needs looking into. I'm not accepting this, and so I had to look into it. I'll let you have my findings today. So, on top of this attack on the Welsh NHS. We recently heard from the Roundtree Foundation that Wales has the highest rate of poverty in the UK, and that the Welsh Government Finance Minister, Mark Drakeford, has suggested workers in Wales be taxed to pay for the fund dedicated to elderly social care. Now, Professor Jerry Holtham, who wrote the Holtham Report, has suggested this as a new form of national insurance for Wales, and said that those who retire to Wales should not be able to take advantage of this fund. Now, I see Professor Holtham's point of view, because economists know that if you subsidise anything, you tend to get more of it. So if we subsidise the large numbers of elderly immigrants from England, then more will come, requiring even more subsidy. Therefore, seemingly, in principle, Professor Holtham does not advocate the subsidy of incoming English retirees from Welsh Government funds. Now, his opposition to subsidies shows that he may well recognise that those elderly people from England who hold untaxed wealth consume more services than Welsh working people who hold no wealth. So why subsidise them? Well, so following from this, we need to ask the question now, is there currently a subsidy of these retirees from England? And if so, where is this subsidy coming from and who is paying for it? The situation in England on immigration is that the English Labour leader and the English Conservative leader, Jeremy Corbyn and Theresa May, are of one mind in that if immigration impinges adversely on the population of England, it should be controlled. In England, there have been few older immigrants. The net increase in foreign citizens aged 65 to 84 was fewer than 18,000 in the period for 2008 to 2014. Immigrants are overwhelmingly of working age. The immigration to Wales is totally different to that of England. In addition to the number of English retirees from England, now approaching some 30% of those over 65 in Wales, we also have a huge influx of immigrants resulting from social cleansing in England. And these require social housing in Wales on a population basis amounting to well in excess of 100,000 immigrants. Now, Campbell Robb, our Chief Executive of Shelter, said it's shocking to see in black and white the sheer volume of homeless families being uprooted and sent miles away. And the Chief Executive of Bernardo said the scale of this is alarming. The socially cleansed from England have high levels of psychological afflictions, with instances of almost 90% among those who leave, and physical disabilities of over 40%. It is evident that in England it is not the working and affluent who are targeted, but rather the sick and poor who they cannot, or rather do not wish to support in affluent areas of England. As we know from a House of Commons report last year, there's a greater incidence of obesity and overweight in England than in Wales, and disproportionately so amongst poorer people who need additional health attention for such things as diabetes, etc. Again, we need to ask the question, is there currently in Wales a subsidising of these socially cleansed from England, and if so, where is this subsidy coming from and who is paying for it? In England, nearly 2/3 of people admitted to hospital are over 65 years old. The Financial Times tells us that hospital, I quote, hospital care for the average 89-year-old man costs the health service 18 times more than for the average 30-year-old. And a 50-year-old man costs twice as much as a 30-year-old. Spending is higher for older people, both because they go to hospital more often, and when they are there, they receive more expensive treatments. People over 65 take up on average some 2.5 times more of the health service funding than the average of the total population. But in the financial settlement for the Welsh Government, the allowance for all people are the same. The financial settlement is based on the Barnett formula, and the Barnett formula, I quote, reflects purely population size. There's no reflection of demographic features. This is Westminster policy for Wales, and it's not working for Wales. Wales gets billions less than Scotland or Northern Ireland, and even receiving less money than the Westminster government gives to the more disadvantaged areas of England. English immigrants over 65 take up NHS Wales funds for which they are only 40% funded. They have their health bill subsidised by 60%. The marginal cost to us for each of these immigrants is 60% of their health bill. How is this subsidy funded? Well, this is funded, we have to cut our cloth to sieve. This is funded by a degradation of NHS Wales. This, despite the Welsh Government withholding funds from education and from other sectors in Wales to boost finances of NHS Wales to fund the subsidy. We know that there are 3 times as many people waiting longer for a year for surgery in Wales than in England, despite the vastly larger population in England. And the Welsh Government mentions the older population. Now, in addition to this, the English retirees place a disproportionate demand for social care which has to be funded. So how much subsidy do we have to give to these elderly English retirees, the poor and sick, from England? We know that England has over 40%, we know that in England over 40% of NHS England funding is devoted to the over 65s. In Wales, we have a higher percentage of over 65s because of the large influx of English retirees, and have to spend approximately 50% of NHS funds on the over 65s. In addition to this, the socially cleansed immigrants make a demand on NHS Wales and social care possibly greater even than for the over 65s. More especially since Labour and Tories voted to cut benefits for disabled people and those with long-term illnesses, which disproportionately affects those socially cleansed immigrants. The result for NHS Wales is that the average cost per head for health treatment in Wales is markedly higher than in England. We also have a substantial number of immigrants from England who come to retire in their late 50s or 60s. We've got to remember that the Welsh population in Wales is not older than the English population in England. It is the large number of elderly in the English population in Wales which gives Wales an older population. The very few immigrants from Europe and further afield are younger and working. It's the elderly and socially cleansed from England which impacts on health requirements and economic activity in Wales. Mark Diane of the Nuffield Trust, this is a Nuffield Trust now, and they've looked into it, said Wales has the highest proportion of people over age 65 all over of anywhere in the UK, which inevitably puts greater strain on the Welsh NHS. The Nuffield Trust says that the huge underfunding of NHS Wales has grown to over £500 million a year. So we in Wales have to subsidise this shortfall. In addition, the Welsh Government is spending hundreds of millions of pounds on housing to facilitate the social cleansing from England. This money again filched from education, etc. So it's not surprising that education in Wales has been underfunded relative to England, contributing to poorer results. In addition, immigrants require funds from the Social Protection Bill. This is a huge bill, by the way, with social care for the elderly, poor and sick immigrants from England. It's evident that the subsidy handed to these immigrants from England is sufficient to fund elderly social care for Welsh residents. We don't need a tax to fund this. We're subsidising people. If they paid for it, we wouldn't have to do this. So the working people don't need to be taxed. So without resorting to taxing further our working people. Of course, this implies that we remove the unfunded subsidy for English retirees, etc., which would require that they have private funds or insurance to finance their health requirements when they come to Wales. Alternatively, of course, they can opt to stay in England and they can avail themselves of NHS England at no cost to themselves. Now, what other country takes in the old, poor and sick from affluent areas of a neighbouring country unless it's in time of famine or war as refugees? As the Rowntree Foundation points out, Wales has the highest rate of poverty in the UK. But of course, we're importing this poverty and subsidising it, which makes us poorer and takes up our funds, making us less able to combat poverty already existing here. Like English Labour and English Conservatives in England, we in Wales need to be able to protect ourselves from immigration which overwhelms our resources, especially as it only makes wealthier areas in England even wealthier as they remove old, sick and poor people to Wales. The immigration problem in Wales is totally different from that purported to be the case in England. Therefore, an immigration policy proposed for England is not relevant to Wales. We need a totally separate, independent immigration policy in the control of the people of Wales. The Welsh Government, while funding inequality, needs to be realistic about this insidious colonialism, which seriously damages our health in Wales, our education and our economy, and for which we have to pay. Thank you very much. There's another talk now with John on economics. And if anybody wants to have a chat about this afterwards, any questions or anything, you know, I'd be happy to talk to anyone. I know we're running a little bit late for John, but...
we've switched it, we've got flexible time.
Is it? Oh, yeah, okay,
yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. 20 minutes.
So, yeah.
Could you tell us you'd have 1 minute?
Now, I've known